The next one is number 2, the realization of the 3 true knowledges. So in here it begins with, I guess, Saka. Is that how you pronounce that one? Saka asked the Blessed One, has there never arisen in Master Gautama a feeling so pleasant that it could invade his mind and remain? Has there never arisen in Master Gautama a feeling so painful that it could invade his mind and remain? Now this is a teaching about what he refers to as 2 darts. Okay, and so talk about some of these in detail. So pay attention to the idea of 2 darts. It's a metaphor. Now, these 3 similes occurred to me spontaneously, never heard before. The Buddha often makes statements like this. Suppose there were a wet, sappy piece of wood lying in the water, and a man came with an upper fire stick, thinking, I shall light a fire. I shall produce heat. Could the man light a fire and produce heat by taking the upper fire stick and rubbing it against a wet, sappy piece of wood lying in the water? No, Master Gautama, because it is a wet, sappy piece of wood and it is lying in water. Eventually the man would reap only weariness and disappointment. So too, those ascetics and Brahmins, so here's the explanation point, who still not live bodily withdrawn from sensual pleasures, and whose sensual desire, affection, infatuation, thirst, and fever for sensual pleasures has not been fully abandoned and suppressed internally, even if those good ascetics and Brahmins feel painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion, they are incapable of knowledge and vision and supreme enlightenment. And even if those good ascetics and Brahmins, so he's covering the whole picture here, ascetics and Brahmins, do not feel painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion, they are incapable of knowledge and vision and supreme enlightenment. This was the first simile. The second simile occurred to me. Suppose there were a wet, sappy piece of wood lying on the ground, lying on dry land, far from water, and a man came with an upper fire stick, thinking, I shall light a fire, I shall produce heat. Could the man light a fire and produce heat by taking the upper fire stick and rubbing it against, here we go again, the wet, sappy piece of wood lying on dry land, far from water? Okay? No, Master Gautama, because it is a wet, sappy piece of wood. So too, as those ascetics and Brahmins who live bodily withdrawn from sensual pleasures, but whose sensual desire, affection, infatuation, thirst, and fever for sensual desires has not been fully abandoned and suppressed internally, even those good ascetics and Brahmins feel painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion. They are incapable of knowledge and vision and supreme enlightenment. And even if those good ascetics and Brahmins do not feel painful, etc., they are incapable of knowledge, vision, and supreme enlightenment. This was the second simile. So you can do things that follow these things, but if you haven't dealt with it internally, okay, then you can't get there all the way. So then he goes on with the third simile. Suppose there were a dry, sapless piece of wood lying on dry land, far from water, and the man came with the upper fire stick, thinking, I shall light a fire, I shall produce heat. Could the man light a fire with produce heat, rubbing against a dry, sapless piece of wood? Yes, Master Gautama. So too, those ascetics and Brahmins who live bodily withdrawn from sensual pleasures, and whose sensual desire, affection, infatuation, thirst, and fever for sensual pleasures has been fully abandoned, in this case, and suppressed internally, even those good ascetics and Brahmins feel painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion, and they are capable of knowledge and vision and supreme enlightenment. So they feel the experience, they have the experience, they feel the experience, but in this case, because they're not bothered by the experience of it, they can overcome those other things and attain supreme enlightenment. So this is the third simile. And then he thought, Suppose my teeth clenched and my tongue pressed against the roof of my mouth, I beat down, constrain, and crush my mind with mind. Although tireless energy was aroused in me and unremitted mindfulness was established, my body was overwrought and strained because I was exhausted by the painful striving. But such painful feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. Okay, so he's overcome, he's transcended this. So continuing on page 62 at the top, number 21. Suppose I practice breathless meditation through my mouth and nose. I did so. There was a loud sound of winds coming from my ear holes. Interesting. Okay. And I was exhausted by painful striving. But such painful feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. And then in 22, suppose I practice further the breathless meditation through my mouth, nose, and ears. Violent winds cut through my head. I was exhausted by the painful striving, but such painful feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. And then he thought, suppose I practice further the breathless meditation, so I stopped the in-breaths and out-breaths through my mouth, nose, and ears. My body was overwrought and strained because I was exhausted by the painful striving, but such painful feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. And then in 24, further the breathless meditation, the mouth, nose, and ears, violent winds carved up my belly. Such painful feeling did not invade my mind and remain. And then suppose I practice further the breathless meditation. There was this violent burning in my body. Such painful feeling did not invade my mind and remain. So he's going through all of these different levels of doing these practices, but he was not overcome by the physical experience or emotional experience that he was having as a part of that. Doesn't mean that he didn't have the experiences, it means that it didn't affect him. So then 26 then, now when deities saw me, some said, the ascetic Gautama is dead. Others said, he is dying. And others said, neither dead nor dying, he is an arhat. 27, suppose I practice entirely cutting off food. Then the deities came to me and said, good sir, do not practice entirely cutting off food. If you do so, we shall infuse heavenly food into the pores of your skin, and this will sustain you. So I dismissed those deities, saying, there is no need. So he doesn't go that far. Number 28, suppose I take very little food, a handful at a time. My body reached, and he did that, then my body reached a state of supreme emaciation. Now this is a story that you may have heard before. My limbs became like the jointed segments of vine stems or bamboo stems. My backside became like a camel's hoof. The projections of on my spine stood forth like corded beads. My ribs jutted out as gaunt and crazy rafters of an old roofless barn. My eyes sank down far into their sockets. My scalp shriveled and withered. My belly adhered to my backbone. If I defecated or urinated, I fell over on my face. If I tried to ease my body by rubbing my limbs with my hands, the hair rotted at its roots and fell to my body as I rubbed. So there are actual statues of him in this state. You can find pictures of those on the internet, just completely emaciated. Number 29, now when people saw me, some said Gautama is black, others said he is brown, others said neither black nor brown, he is golden skinned. And then in 30, whatever ascetics or Brahmins in the past have experienced, this is the utmost, there is none beyond this. And then toward the end of that, number 30 there, but by this racking practice of austerities, I have not attained any superhuman distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones. Could there be another path to enlightenment? So he's gone through all of this for a period of 6 years. He's gone through all of this kind of ascetic practice, but he feels just like when he tried to do the meditation practices that they were helpful, but they weren't achieving what he wanted. So the same thing here. And so then it goes to 31, one of my very favorite stories. I recall that when my father, the Sakyan, was occupied, while I was sitting in the cool shade of a rose apple tree, secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, I entered and dwelled in the first jhana, which accompanied by thought and examination with rapture and happiness born of seclusion. Could this be the path to enlightenment? Then, following on that memory, came the realization, this is indeed the path to enlightenment. Now this is something that happened in his youth. He'd gone to this, what do they call it in this one? I guess it doesn't say. Sometimes referred to as a planting festival, sometimes as a plowing festival. Anyway, he had gone to this thing with his father, so obviously also he had gone outside the palace before he was 30 and decided to leave in order for this to have happened. But this experience, this rose apple tree, sitting under there and doing this meditation by himself, was a significant experience, and he recalls this as an experience that immediately led to his enlightenment. So a very significant story there. Number 32, why am I afraid of that happiness that has nothing to do with sensual pleasures or unwholesome states? Okay, so those things don't, in and of themselves, lead to this experience of happiness. I am not afraid. Number 33, it is not easy to attain happiness with a body so excessively emaciated. Suppose I ate some solid food, and I ate some solid food. At that time the 5 monks were waiting on me, but when I ate the boiled rice and porridge, the 5 monks were disgusted and left me. So the sequence of the story here varies a little bit, and there's lots of stories, and you'll see a lot of variety in exactly when this happens. Most of the stories that I'm familiar, for example, the rose apple tree memory happens when he's sitting under the Bodhi tree to achieve enlightenment. But in this case, this happens while he's still practicing as an ascetic prior to leaving the 5 other ascetics. Then in number 34, now when I had eaten solid food and regained my strength, then secluded from sensual pleasure, secluded from unwholesome states, I entered and dwelled in the first jhana. So this was what he realized under the rose apple tree and remembered that, which is accompanied by thought and examination. So it's not like shamatha, it's more like vipassana. With rapture and happiness born of seclusion, but such pleasant feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. Okay? So even though it was pleasant, that didn't overtake him. So on one hand, he's talked about these other experiences that also didn't overtake him, but they were kind of negative experiences. Now he's talking about this pleasant experience, but he wasn't overwhelmed by the experience itself. He wasn't absorbed in that. He remained in this middle state. Then number 35, with the subsiding of thought and examination, I entered, dwelled in the second jhana. Now the jhanas are actually shamatha type practices, so he's kind of gone back and forth a little bit from one type to the other, which has internal confidence and unification of the mind and rapture and happiness born of concentration. But such pleasant feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. With the fading away of rapture, I dwelled I don't know how to pronounce that. Equanimous. Okay, thank you. And mindful and clearly comprehending. I experienced happiness with the body. I entered and dwelled in the third jhana. And then again, I can't say it for some reason. Mindful, who dwells happily, did not invade my mind and remain. With abandoning of pleasure and pain, and passing away of joy and displeasure, I entered and dwelled in the fourth jhana, which is neither painful nor pleasant and includes the purification of mindfulness and equanimity. The pleasant feeling arose and did not invade my mind and remain. So the one thing that I would point out here is it's gone through the four jhanas, which are all forms of shamatha practice. But you notice that the formless absorptions, which are the higher level practices of meditation, are not included here. Okay? Some stories they are included, but here they're not. Number 38, when my mind was thus concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of imperfection, malleable, wieldly, steady, and attained to impermeability, I directed it to knowledge of the recollection of past lives. Okay, so now he's gone through this meditative process, and now he takes that and directs it to this issue of past lives. So many eons of worldly contraction, expansion, and so forth, so named. There I was so named, a particular clan, such appearance, certain nutriment, my experience of pleasure and pain, and my certain lifespan, and passing away from there, and then being reborn elsewhere. So basically he's saying, I went through all these different kinds of things during this life, and then I was born someplace else, and went through all those kind of things there, and was then born somewhere else, and so forth. So each life. Thus, with their aspects and particulars, I recollected my manifold past lives. And then in 39, this was the first true knowledge. So he's going to go through these true knowledges here. In the first watch of the night, ignorance was banished and true knowledge arose. But such a pleasant feeling did not invade my mind. So again, he's staying out of these kinds of experiences. In number 40, I directed it to knowledge of passing away and rebirth of beings. So this is his second insight here. I saw beings passing away, being reborn, and I understood how beings fare on according to their actions thus. These beings who behaved wrongly by body, speech, and mind, beings who behaved well by body, speech, and mind. So he's seeing beings who have gone through lives in lots of different ways and how they were affected by this. Number 41, this was the second true knowledge. Ignorance was banished and true knowledge arose. But such pleasant feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind. Then in number 42, I directed it then to the knowledge of the destruction of the taints, various bad or undesirable kinds of qualities. This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. So those are the Four Noble Truths. And then he says, these are the taints. These are the origin of the taints. This is the cessation of the taints. This is the way leading to the cessation of taints. And then in 43, my mind was liberated from the taint of sensual desire, from the taint of existence, and from the taint of ignorance. So this would be, the sensual desire would be the craving, and the taint of existence would be attachment, desire, craving kinds of things, and then ignorance about the true nature of things. It is liberated. I directly knew birth is destroyed, the spiritual life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more coming back to any state of being. So he has now transcended this cycle of rebirth. In 44, this was the third true knowledge in the last watch of the night. So during the watch of the night, the first watch of the night is after initial darkness, and the second one is around midnight, and then the third one is before light in the morning. And so during that, over a period of one night, he has done this, and ignorance was banished, true knowledge arose. Such a pleasant feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind. So we'll take another little break here.